Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this latest narration of the web series Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 20, Drones and Diplomacy. The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts, Library Entryway, local time 14:50 hours. I always knew that Thalman was a wolf, or at least eerily reminiscent of one, though there was little in the way of his actions, aside from the occasional tail wag, that really, truly spoke to his lupine heritage. Not in the way he acted, walked, or carried himself, not even in the way he spoke. His vocalizations had always been flitting through the translation suite without any issues, though that generally meant that a lot of his voice was more than likely lost in the process. However, the software did attempt to account for this, going so far as to punctuate each and every translated word with the subdued interpretations of his wolf-like vocalizations, adding a distinct personal flair to the reconstituted speech. From growls to barks and even the occasional yap, all were integrated into the translated output seamlessly and without any issues. At least, that had been the case until now. Emma, the Lupinar mercenary prince all but barked out. But unlike before, I could actually feel the hefty bass and underlying rumbling that carried through the entirety of his speech. This was the first time I was hearing him completely unfiltered. However, this also meant this was the first time I was hearing him without actually understanding him. All of this could only mean one thing. The translation suite was balked. The mercenary prince continued to stare at me, blinking a few times, cocking his head to the side in confusion, and awaiting a response that never came. It was at this point that my training kicked in hard, as I reached for my wrist-mounted datapad, ready to plow through the diagnostic algorithm that had been sheared into my head from the countless hours of field maintenance drilling. My fingers flew across the touchscreen, muscle memory kicking in as the periphery UI was optimized for this sort of thing. A quick and dirty debugging session that was designed to be as intuitive as an idiot-proof as possible. La chao kusi ka tal, kene sa, the wolf continued, now playfully elbowing my armored shoulder guards, beaming out with a wide smile as if trying to bridge the veritable chasm that had suddenly formed out of this inexplicable language barrier. Whatever Thalman was trying to convey was lost on me, even though the context and the casualness of the friendly jab shouldn't really clued me into what was going on. Ulton Neslen Telrain, Emma, the wolf repeated, chuckling to himself a bit as he moved to stand beside me, proceeding to reach his arm over to drape it across my shoulders. Alter, Emma, he reiterated before snapping his head towards Dacia, beaming out an expectant grin as if egging her on to join in what I was quickly surmising was a joke I wasn't privy to. Dacia's reaction confirmed my suspicions as she looked at Thalman with a face of incredulity, completely unamused with the wolf's antics. Now isn't the time for fun and games, Thalman, she sighed with a tone resigned disappointment, before turning to face me. Thalman seems to be testing the limits of what he believes to be your translation artifice, Emma. Evidently, he is running a theory that speaking in a language and dialect completely separate from High Nixian would be sufficient in evading your translation artifice's ability to comprehend what is being spoken, the Yavian explained, causing all of the undue stress and anxiety from the rapidly forming concerns over a faulty translation suite to all but fade away in an instant. Having a major complication hit us this late into the day, what with the rapidly approaching meeting with the apprentice and the weapons inspection after that, would have been a complete disaster and a half to contend with. Forget dealing with those two sensitive issues. I doubt that I could even accomplish ordinary breakfast, let alone deftly navigating the unnecessarily complex social norms that were required as a basic prerequisite. Despite all this, I couldn't help but break out in a dry chuckle. A sly smile formed across my face as I realized just what all of this was. It was, admittedly, a sad realization, but I couldn't deny that this was the first true instance of friendly, silly banter between me and anyone within the hostile world that was the Academy. No, it's quite all right, Dacia, I replied in an uncharacteristically soft tone of voice, one that I wasn't prone to using back at home, let alone here in the Nexus of all places. Thalman's less than amusing jabs reminded me of my own first attempts at breaking the ice when I first moved to the city. With little in the way of friends or family other than my aunt, my first go-to tactic at bridging the social gap was almost always humor, or at least my own off-brand attempt at it. I'd never claimed that I was good at it. Heck, it was borderline cringe. But that didn't detract from the fact that sometimes it worked. And, more importantly, it was being done with genuine intent. It was an honest attempt at breaking through the awkward social barriers that just naturally existed when trying to integrate into anywhere new. The whole exchange was just Thalman's attempt at that, which, honestly, couldn't have come at a better time. "See, Princess, the Earth Rebel here knows how it goes with these sorts of things," the Lupinol beamed. I would be inclined to agree that should the recipient of a jab, one made in good faith, mind you, were to be fine with the whole affair, that should it be socially acceptable. However, considering the fact that we are in the midst of several altercations that must be handled with great care and caution, I find this attempt at humor to be wholly inappropriate. There is a time and place for such things. This isn't one of them. Thassia directed her response at Thalman with an air of unfiltered sincerity. There's a time and place for stoicism, Princess, but sometimes, especially during these rare moments of quiet between battles, you just have to embrace levity, Thalman responded in kind, prompting me to honestly reevaluate my whole stance on the Nexus thus far. My personal perceptions and general interpretations of this place had already begun to solidify following the constant stream of crises that had targeted me one after the other. Everything about the Academy, from its general vibes to its legit transgressions, was about enough for me to consider this place a complete and utter write-off, that all there was to this entire place was just one crisis to be overcome after another. And while that was true, this whole exchange showed me that there was more to it than that. It gave me genuine hope that perhaps moving forward there would be more of this banter to look forward to, more instances of nonsensical interactions amongst friends, more of just regular day-to-day life, rather than the scheming and machinations that had come to dominate most of my headspace up to this point. It was with that I gave the wolf a playful punt on his shoulder, not enough to induce pain or hurt, but just enough to make my point. With a little internal deliberation on whether or not I should try my own hand at this game, I decided to return the favor in my own way. "Rohen Dubois, Thalman," I spoke, saying something that loosely translated to, "Definitely see eye to eye with you there, Thalman." I intentionally spoke in Thai, a language that wouldn't be picked up by the translation suite, given that it was designed explicitly for English to High Nexian translations. Whilst rusty, having only been taught by my mom's side of the family, I still knew my way around the language enough to hold a decent conversation, at least according to my aunt, though admittedly I didn't really have many places to practice it, given that it wasn't common across North America, and rarer still once you left the boundaries of Earth's orbital rings. Still, it was at least commonly spoken enough amongst the populations of the mainland states of the Southeast Asian Confederation. So I had that going for me. However, as it stood, the only real place I got any practice with it nowadays was from a certain terrifying green owl that lived only to taunt me whenever I reached to check my phone notifications. It amazed me to think that the language learning app was founded over a millennium ago, and it terrified me to imagine just how many lives it had tormented over the years. I swore the thing was more aggressive at getting me to practice than my mum ever was. "Is this how you sound like underneath the armor, and without translation artifice?" Thalman spoke, cocking his head to the side so quickly that those triangular-shaped ears flopped about as he did so. "Yes, kind of. I mean, sometimes, at least. I just chose to speak in a language that my translator couldn't translate to High Nexian as a way of getting back at your antics," I answered, switching back to English, and thus allowing my poor, confused translation software to function as it was intended to. "What you're hearing now is me speaking in my native tongue of English, being translated in real time to High Nexian. I could just turn it off and speak to untranslated English, but that'd be too much of a hassle." "So you really can't speak High Nexian?" Thalman doubled down. "Nope," I responded succinctly. "And that's 2 more arrows in your quiver with which you can take as a token as ever-growing collection of respect for you and your people, Emma." "Yeah." The wolf responded with a big dumb grin on his face. His teeth were bared in a white, almost dumb expression, which certainly gave off the intended effect to me and Thassia, but more than likely would have caused any prey species to scurry off and cower in abject terror. 2 arrows, I parroted back, which garnered a reaffirming nod from the Lupinol Prince. "Yes, although if you ask anyone else, they would say my second point is borderline heretical. The first arrow was for the obvious. The fact that your people have somehow managed to create something on par, or at least close enough to the capabilities of a translation stone without any mana. The second, just as I say, I enjoy the fact that any time you speak, whether it be to a Nexian loyalist or to adjacent realm kneebender, that you're speaking in your own tongue, not the language of the occupying force. So anytime you speak, you're effectively defying the institutions of Nexus without them even knowing it. The wolf chuckled. And that's music to my ears, Emma. To clarify, Emma, Thalman is bringing up the overarching, unspoken expectations that come with being an adjacent realmer. That being the expectation that every new realmer, and the chosen candidate at that, should have spent all the time necessary in studying and becoming natively fluent in High Nexian. This entire gesture is one of the core fundamentals of demonstrating fealty to the Nexus. The fact that your people have spent just as much, if not more time, on circumventing the issue altogether, rather than spending the time to study High Nexian, speaks volumes to your dedication in maintaining your independence. Dacia elaborated further, not necessarily outing her own political beliefs as explicitly as Thalman had, but very much hinting at it. Honestly, the fact that your people chose the harder, impossible route of creating a translation stone without mana just to worm your way out of speaking High Nexian is just beautiful. What this says to me is that your people would rather defy the fundamental laws of magic than choose to bend the knee. Thalman beamed out, while the Lupanar was certainly projecting. I appreciated the fact that his heart was in the right place. You're really giving too much credit to me, guys, I chuckled back awkwardly, instinctually reaching my arm to scratch behind my back, only to bonk the two armored bits of my body together. Trust me, it's not as big of a thing as you think. All of this is just done out of practicality. My people needed a reliable way to make sure that I was able to communicate, and so they just did what their job entailed, I replied without any hesitation. Modesty and humility. Will our permanently armored knight ever cease to play her part? Thalman replied with a teasing smirk on his face, once more patting me on the shoulder, just to hammer the point home. You know, princess, if you ever needed a knight in shining armor, this one's definitely not a bad deal. The mercenary prince addressed Dacio with a snicker, eliciting a nervous look of hesitancy from the avian in question. I mean, with the room assignments. That's enough, Thalman, thank you. Dacia shot the wolf down before he could continue any further. Though flustered, there clearly wasn't any bad blood present in the air. Everything felt normal, almost too eerily normal given that I experienced thus far. And while tonally disconnected from everything else that had happened and that would eventually come, it was a welcome tangent, one that I honestly wished I could put in a bottle. So, shall we be on our way then? I offered, choosing to be the one to end this little round of banter on my own terms. The wolf let out a hint of a whimper at this, but nodded anyway. Dacia, meanwhile, remained stoic and nonplussed as ever, once more taking the lead as navigator amidst the vast unknown seas that were the Academy's maze-like halls. There was a moment there where it felt like it all clicked, where the three of us, just by virtue of us sharing a similar sentiment and underlying non-compliance, felt like we stood ready against the world. I know it was silly to say. Heck, I hadn't even been that long since we met, but I couldn't help but feel the overwhelming warm fuzziness overcoming me as the fact that I had allies backing me up really started to sink in. Whatever happens, guys, just know that I really appreciate that you guys are with me, I managed out softly. The Transgration Academy for Magical Arts, main garden, local time 15-20 hours. Whilst Dacia was indeed an invaluable insight into both the Nexus and Academy, it was clear that even she was not immune from the utter insanity that was the Academy's maze-like layout. Whilst the floor plan did make it seem as if the garden was a brisk 10-minute walk from the library, it was clear that we didn't account for the ludicrous obstacles the Academy threw our way, as it radiated a chaotic energy that even I couldn't match. As we passed through the constantly moving staircases, evaded the untold number of wild antics that flooded from the halls, sometimes literally, with shenanigans befitting their own stories, and eventually landed ourselves at a massive archway that gave way to the garden that rivaled the scale and the grandeur of Versailles. Right, so if memory serves, the apprentice wanted us to track down a gardener or groundkeeper named Elaton, I announced, turning to both of my peers who looked drained from the journey it took to get here. Yes, and I've checked the faculty roster on the syllabus. Individuals who aren't directly involved with treating don't seem to be mentioned. So we effectively have no leads here, Dacier explained. Thalman let out a series of annoyed grunts as he pointed towards the massive hedge maze that lay in front of us. It seems like the Academy has even more games for us to play. I mean, it can't be that hard, right? I shrugged. Spoiler alert, it was hard. Or rather, it would have been hard if it wasn't for a few of my friends that I literally employed to make my life a whole lot easier. Similar to the battlefield management system and active battle maps synonymous that came as standard with any modern commander's complement of tools, I too was equipped with the means of ensuring that I had some level of battlefield awareness, even if I was lacking in a lot of infrastructure that was normally required to set up and maintain something that complex. My suit's proprietary forward expeditionary battlefield network and passive monitoring system, or the FEB-NPMS, as the eggheads at home preferred to call it, was a scaled-down version of a modern BattleNet system that allowed me to observe things from a limited bird's-eye view. It involved sending up a single drone, or 4 drones if I wanted more complex readouts of the topography, terrain, and potential upfalls. These drones would then hover overhead, either remaining static or moving parallel to my movements on the ground, granting me a limited bubble of battlefield awareness about 340 feet around me. This could be enhanced, augmented, or modified whichever way I deemed necessary, with more drones adding to the range, detail, or what have you. As for now, I settled on a single drone as a disc-like device shot itself from my recessed compartment on my suit's backpack, before settling into a comfortable spot around 700 feet overhead. I wasn't here to play games, and going through a hedge maze was just about the last thing I wanted to do right now. Emma, what the hell is that? And what did you just do? Thalman asked me, as yet another quizzical look in his eyes. The wolf was clearly attempting to refrain from tilting his head to the side, as he had done prior. It's our way of cheating the hedge maze and getting what we want without playing their games, I spoke, as a bird's-eye map was promptly added into the increasingly crowded group of picture-in-picture displays on my HUD. It only took me a few seconds for me to locate our man, or at least what I assumed was our man. The fact that he was large, burly, and scruffily dressed, with dirt all over his overalls, was what led me to assume that he was our man at the very least. We marched through the head maze with confidence, the drone above us pointing us in the right position until we ran into the man in question. As soon as we entered his little corner of the hedge maze, however, he began to stand up, his height rising to such a ridiculous degree that his head actually poked out through the very tops of the hedges. It was then that I realized the drone probably wasn't necessary, and that the apprentice was more than likely asked us to find the groundskeeper, not as a means with toying with us, but because the man was so large that he acted as a landmark that you couldn't miss. All right then, what is this all about? The lumbering giant bellowed out. Ha! I would have expected to see a knight, a princess, and a mercenary prince all in one place. This most certainly is a story for a bar counter. I decided just to get straight to the point. I am looking for apprentice. I stopped in my tracks, realizing that whilst I did know her name, that I'd learned it from the drone and its secretly captured footage. I actually don't know her name, come to think of it, I explained with a nervous laugh. She did say that she'd be here sometime during this afternoon. She told me to ask you where she is, so... Apprentice Lariel, the giant interjected. Yes, she's taken over a section of the hedge for herself when she became an apprentice. You know, back in my day, I remember her very much having an affinity for plant-based magical arts. So it makes sense that if she's graduated and decided on continuing with her studies, that she'd come back here for a newfound rank and station to actually make part of this little edge her own. It's poetic, really, and... Groundskeeper Adelon, I do apologize for our brashness, but we really must speak with apprentice post-haste. It is a matter of great urgency. Dacier casually shot down the kindly giant's tirade, which honestly, I was thankful for. I definitely didn't want to be the one to stop the man's whole nostalgic tangent. Of course, princess. Just follow me then. The giant bowed deeply before gesturing for us to follow. We went deeper into the hedge maze and into a section that didn't seem to exist on the drone's BattleNet readouts. From the drone's perspective, it looked as if we were moving into another part of the maze, only to blink out of existence. Indeed, from the air, it looked like the maze was now empty. Alert, localized surge of matter radiation detected, 400% above background radiation levels. With a conflicting set of parameters being beamed out, It was still receiving my signal, but unable to confirm my physical presence. The drone went into standby mode. This new section of maze was more or less identical to the rest, except as we got deeper, the vibrancy of the flora seemed to increase as well. This all came to a head as we got a nook in the maze and arrived at what could only be described as a scene out of Alice in Wonderland. Sitting in a small slice of Victorian-era gazebo was the apprentice, her hair frazzled, with both hands currently in the process of ruffling up the rest of it. She definitely looked worse for wear than when we last met.
"Apprentice L'Oreal, I have the student you mentioned earlier," the giant exclaimed, which garnered the apprentice's attention almost instantly.
Thank you, Tyven, the exhausted elf spoke with an attempt at a smile.
"You really mustn't overexert yourself, apprentice. Seeing you like this worries me greatly."
The giant spoke with worry, which only served to boost the apprentice's attempts at putting up a strong face. It's quite all right, Tyven. Now please, I require privacy. The apprentice responded not so much as a command, but more so a request. Everything I was seeing was really starting to make me question whether or not I'd been too quick to judge the apprentice. I couldn't worry about that right now, however. There was business to be decided. Tell your boss I need my bomb back, L'Oreal, is what I wanted to say. Though at this point, I knew I had to be more diplomatic than that. Apprentice, This is a meeting predicated on the rights of personal privilege. The prince and princess cannot be here, the apprentice interjected coldly, prompting both Dacia and Thaman to leave, and prompting me to ramp up my suit's onboard threat detection systems in response. Right, what's this all about then, dear Rabba? Apprentice, I'll be very forthright with you. I know for a fact that Professor Melteroy is in possession of my missing crate, and while that in and of itself is an offense in its own right, that's not what I'm here for, I began. If it's not false accusations being thrown around, then what is it then, Earthrealmer? The apprentice shot back defensively, adjusting her posture on what was a weird combination of wrought iron seat supported by slivers of vine. It's the fact that the crate poses a danger that none of you have yet the capacity of detecting. I spoke plainly, and without a hint of condescension or aggression. This was a matter-of-fact statement that threw even the apprentice off, which gave me ample time to elaborate further. I'm here to warn you of the dangers posed by tampering with one of my nation's property. As much as I'm about theft itself, there's a very real possibility someone will get hurt, plain and simple, apprentice. If your objective is to undermine, or in this case cast doubt upon the competence of the faculty, then I'm afraid your posturing will not get you far in the academy, Emma Booker, the apprentice replied, as if taking genuine offense. Apprentice, please. I'm not here to stir up drama for the sake of it. If lives went on the line, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Emma, the apprentice stood from her seat with a look of patronizing worry. It is clear to me that you come from a world of constant threats and dangers. You no longer have to worry about that here. I understand latent anxieties that may remain. You grew up in a savage land, after all. But please, understand that you are safe here. There is no danger within the academy. The elf couldn't have known that her last rebuttals would be forever drenched in an irony so intense that my reports on the day's events were more than sure to be scrutinized for artistic embellishment. Warning 1, unknown target detected. The automated IFF system reported, meaning it picked up something that most definitely fit the custom parameters of a high alert threat assessment mode that I set to earlier. Target reference 233 from current location, highlighting target now. The system was designed to extrapolate upon the sensor suites built into my suit, even without the aid of the drones flying overhead. It interlaid a splicing various images systems onto my HUD, giving me a detailed readout of what I was facing down should the situation demand it. Theoretically, this meant that the entirety of the hedge garden we currently stood in was all intents and purposes see-through to the range of about 230 feet. I colloquially refer to it as X-ray vision, though that was doing the sensors a disservice given that how much of the electromagnetic spectrum that it was scanning through any given time. Indeed, I could see the groundskeeper standing about 200 feet away from us at the very edges of the garden. Tending to something, the data aggregator found too irrelevant to allocate processing power to. At 50 feet away, one of the inner rows of the gardens where Dacia and Thalman currently chatting about something. All of these figures were highlighted with a glowing blue and white outline denoting their friend status on the IFF. In addition to this, a small information overlay denoted the general body layout, with everyone having been mentioned thus far marked as humanoid, as was to be expected. The new figure in question, however, did not conform to this general convention. Unlike the rest of the figures highlighted, or the multitudes of creatures that had threat assessment system was programmed to identify, the unknown interloper was simply marked with a series of NAs where its general descriptors should be. The thing lingered for a while, standing still, completely unmoving. It made me think I had time to plan. Evie, analyze, alert, target trajectory confirmed, target approaching. It made me miscalculate. 200 feet. Apprentice, we have to go now, I shouted loudly through the vocoders, my voice shaking just as a jumbled mess of what had highlighted figure got closer. The elf, as if on cue, stared at me with concerned, perturbed expression. I'm afraid you're panicking for nothing. 100 feet. Delman, that's here. Get the hell out of here now. It's here. I yelled out through the vocoder as loud as I could, prompting the pair to scramble in place, knowing full well what the warning entailed. 20 feet. There was no time to think, no time to even react properly, as muscle memory and drilling overloaded diplomatic concerns right then and there. 10 feet. I reached for my sidearm just in time to see the apprentice's small idyllic retreat trampled over with a deafening thud. The null was here. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.